Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. Together, we explore topics of interest to in-house lawyers. Let's begin. Here's your host, Olga Mack.
Well, hello, everyone. I am so excited about this conversation. It's a conversation with someone I recently met and have been deeply impressed with who she is as a person and the quality of work she does. And without further ado, Kemi, welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. We're finally able to have this conversation. And for folks who haven't met you, please introduce yourself.
Yes. Hey, everyone. I'm Kemi Ijitimehin. I'm an attorney based in Atlanta, Georgia, focusing primarily on advertising, ad tech issues. And so I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you about my journey and all the things I love about the law. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, that is so exciting. And maybe let me ask you about your past and specifically, how does one get up in the morning and become an advertisement lawyer?
Yeah, if you looked at my journey, you'd say by accident, honestly. So I actually my interest in the law started when I was in high school, funny enough, and it wasn't on purpose. It was basically a teenager, you get your first car, you can drive, and the school told us that essentially if you find a job with someone in the community, you can leave school at 12 o'clock, which is golden if you're a teenager and you have your first car, right? And you think this is pretty cool. So I ended up getting a job with the law firm that represented the school district. And so from there, my love of the law kind of just grew. And so when I went to the University of Georgia, eventually I would change and become a pre-law major. That took me down to the University of Miami. And then from there, I moved to DC, where I started my career in public policy, then went to work for the federal government and eventually transitioned to a tech company. And so all around, when you look at the journey, none of it seems to actually fit together. But I think the seeds were being planted along the way. And as you get to grow and learn things, people give you opportunities. And so you become an advertising lawyer. And so that's how my journey happened.
Oh, I love that. From academia to government to tech
Yeah.
company, that's how you become.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I don't think at the time I could have said, this is where you'll end up. I remember going to law school and saying I had an interest in entertainment and media, but I didn't really know what that meant. And I think at that time it meant mostly just contracts to me. And of course, as you gain more experience, you see the government policy, you start to understand that, oh, being a lawyer, even if it's advertising and media, can mean a lot of things. And it's just been an interesting journey and one that I'm deeply grateful for.
I love that. And I love that how you noticed, oh, I thought it was just contracts, but then there's a lot more to this. So give me some examples and tell me, when were the moments where you were thinking, oh, I should do this pivot. Oh, that makes sense. Oh, this is so much richer than I expected.
Yeah.
What are the moments? Bring me to those moments, Cami.
The moments. I think, and so I was reflecting a lot before we had this conversation. And so this answer is going to be a little bit longer, but I think it's important to delve in a little bit. And I was expecting, like, why was I so comfortable constantly making these pivots, doing different things? And I realized it was the origin story of my family. And so to understand who I am, you kind of have to understand a little bit of who my family is. So my grandmother grew up in Louisiana as a sharecropper, right? She sharecropped with her family on a plantation for most of her child life. But at some point, as expected, wages were unfair in the sharecropping industry. And so her mother moved them to what was considered the city, which is still a very small town, but a small town called Shreveport, Louisiana. They lived in a one room with all of her family because that's what they could afford. And so I realized that the seeds of pivoting were planted early on. And so then if you look at my grandfather, who was a combat veteran who came back to Louisiana at a time where maybe being Black and being a veteran were difficult conversations, I learned that they were constantly making pivots. And so my mother, when she was looking for opportunity and she left Louisiana, moved to Atlanta without knowing anyone. My father left Nigeria, moved to Texas without knowing anyone, then moved to Atlanta. So I recognized that pivot was something that I grew up knowing a lot about. And I recognized that those seeds were planted earlier. And so then when you bring it to my situation, I constantly took opportunities that came to me. So for example, when I graduated law school, I graduated with honors, but I didn't have a job, right? Because I was a first gen everything. I knew nothing about like how to do law school correctly, didn't apply for OCI, all the things. So when I graduated without a job, I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm down in Miami. I'm looking for something. So I moved back home with my parents. I'm working in the school district that I basically grew up in, the same school district that gave me the opportunity to go work at the law firm. And I get a call from someone I did an internship with while I was in Miami. And they're like, there's this job in DC, come work for this firm doing public policy stuff. And so I'm like, I guess I'll go to DC. I've been there a couple of times, but I don't really know that many people in DC. But I end up in DC doing the policy thing. And then I'm like, okay, this is a great first job, but maybe I want something a little bit more traditionally legal. And so I'm like, okay, I'll go to the federal government doing something completely different, right? And so then I'm in the federal government doing COVID, all of the things, looking into a lot of those issues. And ultimately, I'm like, okay, maybe it's time again to pivot towards something new. And so really it's almost like a feeling, which I know is such an arbitrary answer, but you can start to feel almost, right? And it could be in part because of my family's background and like growing up with those examples of pushing through fear, making sure that you always are going after opportunity, that I learned how to feel it, but you almost get a feeling of, okay, it's time to pivot. And then when you start to do that, I find that things come your way. And so if you're ready to take the opportunity, you can.
Oh, I love it. Pivot is a vibe.
It's a vibe. It's a vibe. And once you get, and that's the best way that I would describe it, is a vibe. And honestly, sometimes you don't even know what you're pivoting to. So you're like, oh, I think I should pivot, but what does that mean? But sometimes you'll start to get a vibe, right? A vibe that this is the right pivot or that's not the right pivot. And so I think it's part of the pivoting and learning to pivot is learning to trust yourself and learning to really understand, like, who am I and what am I looking for and what opportunities feel right. And again, such an arbitrary answer, especially for a lawyer, because we're known for our analytical skills, but pivoting is a vibe.
I love that. So
Yeah.
how do you know? I'm gonna the vibe, and I really love how you're like, hey, my whole family has been like pivoting as a lifestyle. We pivot
Yeah.
everything. You
Yeah.
know, when you find yourself in circumstances that are unfavorable or unfair, or the ones you don't want to pivot is all you have left, kind of
Yeah.
thing. And that's why I like it when you said, I guess I'll go to DC, I'll do this policy thing, and then I'll do this other thing. But I'm just curious, every one of those moments are pivots.
Yeah.
When do you know the time is right? Like is that a feeling? Is that, what is the self-talk? How
Yeah.
do you identify the pivot? And then how do you choose the pivot?
Yeah. I think you start to know that something is I think it's almost when you start a new job or you get into a new relationship or you feel really excited at the beginning, right? And over time that thing happens where you really love it still, but you start to feel like, I wonder if this is still the right fit. And it's in part because we're all constantly changing. And so sometimes that change starts to push you and realize maybe this opportunity isn't still the best fit. And so I would say it starts with the feeling. But then two, it starts with understanding the why. Why do I feel that this isn't the right fit in this moment? And then from there, it transforms into, okay, how do I identify things that might be better fits based on what I've identified as my why? Right. And so I can tell you, for example, when I was thinking about transitioning from the federal government to the private sector, we're in the middle of COVID. I had a lot of personal challenges and some professional. And I was looking I need a little bit more freedom, right? I need more freedom. This is a real conversation. There are some medical benefits that I don't have with the federal government that I need and they have those in the private sector. And so it was like life pushing me to say, you need to pivot. And so then from there, about once you say, okay, I need to pivot, it's about evaluating the opportunities based on that desire, right? So I kind of knew these are the two things that are driving me to need to pivot, right? I'm in DC by myself. My family's here in Atlanta. And so you're kind of like, okay, maybe that's a place where I can think about what does pivot look like. And so I think once you know those driving forces, it becomes easier to evaluate what's the right pivot and what's not the right pivot. And you start to figure out, okay, I am not going to do well with X. And if that company has all of X, that's probably not the place for me. And so I think it's a careful journey of knowing yourself and continuing to push forward.
I love it. And thank you for walking me through this. How do you separate vibe from the ambience?
Yeah.
It was like, should I not? And then how do you know? And I love that you anchored in my why. And what is your why? And how do you lawyer yourself through that why when you're trying to separate the ambience from the clear signal to pivot?
Yeah. I think again, it goes back to my family, like learning pivoting as essentially a survival skill, right? And so when I'm trying to figure out the ambience of like, how do I survive? it basically is like, what level of survival am I trying to do right now? Am I trying to survive just to get to the next thing? Am I trying to survive and set myself up for something bigger? Am I surviving because there's a longer term picture that I'm looking at? And so for me, it still goes back to, once you understand the root of who you are, what you're looking for next, the pivot becomes a little bit clearer, right? And even sometimes you'll go after things you think are the perfect pivot for you, and it won't work out. And sometimes that's the perfect kind of example of, okay, that wasn't exactly the right pivot. And so I think it's helpful, because sometimes we see those opportunities as, oh, I got rejected. But often it's just like a way of redirecting you to the pivot that you're supposed to make. And I've been very grateful when that happens.
Yeah, I want to talk about two things. I definitely want to hit on that rejection, but
Yeah.
you mentioned this vibe being something maybe possibly different than
Yeah.
expectation to be analytical.
Yeah.
Tell me why you say that. I'm curious how.
Yeah, so I think that, like, so one, I'm a Virgo, so I'll just start off by saying, so we already have, like, if you believe in the stars, we already have a bad kind of reputation for being very type A. But then I think if you add on like lawyering, right, people often view lawyers as incredibly analytical, as black and white people, as people who like are strict followers of X or Y or Z. And so I think that sometimes this idea that you can be a creative and be a lawyer feel like not like they're not congruent. And it also feels, oh, if you're a lawyer, you can't feel your way through things, because that's not how lawyers reason, and that's not how they reach conclusions and decisions and live their lives, because it's not really a character trait of lawyers. And I have found that I don't think that's true, because honestly, I believe the practice of law is creative in itself. But like, that's a whole nother rabbit hole that I could definitely go down.
Okay, we'll definitely go down the rabbit hole, because that part about creativity is one of my favorite topics in life, just general, and not just
Yeah.
lawyering, but rejection. It's really interesting. It sounds like you developed the self-talk around, hey, life is redirecting me. I know at some point I've developed the talk. Rejection just basically means that this was not high enough goal for me. But
Yeah,
I'm
that's a
curious.
great one. Yeah, that's a great
I
one.
should aim higher, because I think
Yeah.
the tendency is to aim lower when you get rejected. Curious, how do you use that self-talk, and how does it propel you forward?
Yeah. I think this self-talk, I think honestly, rejection is painful. And so I don't want to be at all, I don't want to dismiss that, because I think that's true for everyone. Even if you do have positive self-talk, I think rejection is painful, and it is truly a muscle skill learning to push yourself through rejection. I think, again, it goes back to my origin story around like survival, right? I think that even when I have gotten rejected, I have had this overwhelming desire to survive or to become, to push forward. And usually that is the drive that has kept me going. So for example, obviously when you leave law school, you're thinking like, oh, I'm going to get this huge job. It's not going to be this hard. I probably went almost 6 months plus without a job, right? And so you're getting rejected a lot, because it's not like you're not applying, particularly like after law school. But it's that overwhelming drive of, I must survive. I must keep pushing. I must make it. And so that kind of pushes you and propels you and makes you feel, and often when you're getting rejections too, it's not always that the rejection is like a negative rejection and that people aren't like, oh, you're great, but they're just with someone better for the role. It's usually there's a mix of positive feedback. So you take the positive feedback, right? You hear someone say, okay, you were great, but maybe this wasn't the perfect fit. And you use that to figure out like, okay, how can I propel myself forward, or maybe position myself better for the next opportunity based on the feedback that I've been given, knowing that my goal is continue to push forward because I have to.
I love that. And let's talk about the creativity, because I promise.
Yes.
Tell me how that becomes part of the vibe.
Yeah. I think that you honestly, I feel like I've gotten the opportunity to be most creative as product counsel. And that's why, honestly, it's one of the things that I absolutely love in the legal profession in terms of types of roles. So I think when I originally, again, first gen, so I don't know anything about being lawyers except for Matlock, right? And so when I got into the legal field and realized like, oh, there's this thing called in-house, and these lawyers actually work with people who maybe aren't lawyers, and they talk to people in regular language, they learn about technical stuff, they figure out how to solve problems in a way that is less black and white than this is the law. I realized that in of itself is a creative practice. It's a creative practice to figure out how do you design a product that does the things that you need it to do, but also fits within a framework that maybe wasn't designed for it legally. And so in that way, that is what I absolutely love about product counseling, about the law, is that it's an opportunity to expand your mind. It's an opportunity to think creatively. It's an opportunity to develop solutions that don't fit in boxes. And I love that.
Oh my God, I finally discovered the it we have in common. It's the
Yeah,
product law as a
I
source
love it.
of
I
a
love it.
creativity outlet because you're co-creating with other creatives and you talk to normal people and don't have to wear a suit. I love that. You can show up as yourself, your creative self, just so you happen to know law. Oh my God, Kemi, now I know. Thank you for that.
I know. I'm laughing at you talk to normal people because no one considers the lawyers as normal.
Ish. There's a lot in the ish. Okay, well, many
Absolutely.
lawyers dream about going in house, and that's actually probably one of the number one conversation lawyers of all ages and vintages pull me aside for. But if you really truly understand what that transition requires, and you just alluded to a couple of rejections and creativity and
Yeah.
flexibility and maybe suspension of that analytic,
Yeah.
all kinds of things. What surprised you the most when you made the move? And you made a few moves when you
Yeah.
made the move in house.
Yeah. I would say the biggest surprise was probably understanding how important the soft skills of managing relationships and developing them were in connection with the strict letter of the law. I realized, right, when you're going in house, particularly if you're going in house as product counsel, it's important to understand the law, but being able to know the law 100% of the time and get it 100% right all the time was less important than the ability to build relationships. Don't get me wrong, right? Like most lawyers, I am absolutely a perfectionist. I want to be right 100% of the time. I want to never deliver a wrong answer. I want to always say the right thing. But the reality is that no one is perfect. And so I found that when you build relationships with your clients, with other people who you work with, it becomes much easier to navigate ambiguity. It becomes much easier to have these conversations that are difficult, particularly if you've told someone an answer and you're like, oh, that wasn't 100% right, right? And so I think that one of the skills that I think that you probably need to master, or you're going to have to master once you get into the role, is the ability to work with all kinds of people and to develop some of that muscle around managing and developing relationships with others.
I love that. So let's talk about it. You
Yeah.
describe yourself as someone who has not only advised businesses, how build them. And
Yeah.
just alluded to co-creation and creativity involved and the ambiguity and the human skills of that.
Yeah.
What is the difference between counseling a business and helping build one?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a good question. Good question. If I had to say what would be the analogy, I would say the analogy, and like I think this is one that most people probably relate to in some form, it would be the difference between dating and a marriage, right? I think that when we think about dating, as some people, I guess at least, you think about it as more transactional, right? Like we're here for a particular time and purpose. I answer the questions that you ask me. We do this for a time. And then if it doesn't end in marriage, we move on. Or maybe you don't, right? But then when most people think about marriage, they think about that as like a long-term type situation where you're thinking about how do the decisions we make today affect the tomorrow, right? How do we set ourselves up to be where we want to be in the future? And so I think that when I think about advising versus building, in my experience, advising is transactional, right? It's you came to me and asked me a question and I answered it in a way that maybe was legal, maybe was a little creative, but I answered the legal question and I said, okay, go and have fun and do what you want based on the question that you've asked me. I think that building a business requires something much more strategic. It requires understanding the why. I want to understand why you want to make these choices. I need to understand what the business goal is. I need to understand where you see this business in 5 years. So then when you're asking me a question, I can help you from a bigger picture point of view. And I think it gets even more complicated because often as you're building a business, you're talking about something that's in its infancy, right? So people do really need to know the answer to the question. They do need the transaction completed. And so part of it becomes like, how do I get the buy-in to have this broader conversation when really at this point, particularly if it's a business that's revenue driven, they need the answer to the transaction, right? And so that becomes, again, going back to that, how do I manage relationships and make sure that people trust my advice? So they know I'll answer the transactional question, right? I'll date you, but we got to get to the marriage portion too, right?
I love that. So that long-term orientation and collective good, which is,
Yeah.
I would say, should be, could be a feature of a marriage. I'm putting asterisk not because based on personal experiences, but based on the fact that 50% of us are likely to get divorced.
That's
So,
true.
so that does break down, statistically speaking, without singling out any
Yeah.
specific cases.
Yeah.
But going with the analogy of a larger good and collective problem solving, and you mentioned buy-in. How do you get some? Like, how do you get to that trust? How do you get some buy-in?
Yeah, I think it's knowing what people care about, right? And I think it's authenticity, right? I think it was interesting when you said 50% of marriages end in divorce, right? We all know the statistic, right? But I think there's still some good that can be done in the time while you're together, right? And I think it's similar in like when you think about building a business and a
I'm gonna
job.
pause you.
Yeah.
You just said, even if it is a for now marriage, let's
Yeah,
do
listen.
some good together. Let's do some.
Listen, we're still good together and we're still reaching our goal, which I think is like some beautiful things can happen in that time where you're advising a business as it's building, right? And so I think that it's building the trust, right? That's how you start to get buy-in. And I have found the way that I built trust had nothing to do with it had something to do with the advice that I given, and that the advice needed to be realistic based on the industry that I was in. But it also had a lot more to do with when it was your client's birthday, did you send them a message, right? If they had something happen in their family, did you reach out and see how they were as a person? And I don't do that because I don't care. I actually genuinely care about people and want to make sure that your experience with me and your experience at this place is equally as positive and as supported as mine is. But I found that like that is the way that you start to really make people understand that I'm a person too. And even though sometimes we might be maybe on the opposite or together on the same end of an issue, at the end of the day, I care. And so I have found it's not a non-legal answer, but that is the best way to start to build a trust. And then when you have to come in and say, hey, this is a difficult legal conversation because there are some ways that you probably could do this and that are perfectly fine, but I want to recommend something that's maybe a little bit different. People recognize this is an authentic person. This is a person who tries to show up as who she is. She shows up and does the hard work. And so even if I don't agree with her and we ultimately end up on two ends of the spectrum, I should hear her out. And honestly, isn't that what we all want, right? We all just want an opportunity to be heard and to help shape whatever decision is going to be made, whether it's the same decision that I think should be made or another one.
According to newspapers, I want some AI.
Yeah, listen, I love this.
My life.
I am ashamed at how much I use AI at this point, but I'm not gonna, I love the efficiencies, right? I recognize that there are lots of environmental issues, things that people want to consider and should be part of the conversation as we talk about AI. But I'm like, I cannot tell you, AI has driven so many efficiencies for me that I'm like, you're gonna have to pry it out of my hands at this point. I don't know what to tell you.
I love it, but it sounds like the human piece of it is also hard to replace.
Yeah, even in AI, right? AI is powerful and it can do lots of things, but you can't remove the people out of it, right? Because AI doesn't know the questions to ask. At least the AIs that I have used. Maybe there's AI out there that does. They don't know the questions to ask, right? And so they don't know how to refine. They don't know how to use judgment calls and without a prompt. And so the human piece is important, both because AI doesn't is literally is not capable of doing that, but then too because I think we're all human. At the end of the day, we think that people make decisions, and this includes in business, based on what's always 100% rational, and the reality is that's not true.
And if you want to confirm it, start next conversation with your bot by saying something along the line, hey, good to see you. What's on my mind? And you'll get a very cute response like, I have no idea.
Exactly. Something very cute. They're gonna be like, I think you're a person. Maybe you feel so, I am an avid user of AI. I love it, but I do think people are still needed, and I don't think that's going away. But who knows? Maybe they'll prove me wrong.
Yeah, I'm waiting. At what point in your career did you stop thinking like a lawyer who supports the business and starts to think like a business leader who happens to be a lawyer, which is exactly what you just
Yeah.
described? Let me give you a solution you haven't thought about, and maybe not what normally you would think about, and maybe not the standard solution the lawyer would give to cover malpractice behind. But
Yeah.
I, as a true business partner, will give you that because that actually practically solves your challenge.
Yeah. So it surprisingly enough, it was when I worked for the federal government. I think particularly because I was working for the federal government during COVID, right? So that was a time when there's something unprecedented, never happened before. And so the government is trying to grapple with a lot of what do we do, right? And so in that moment, it's all hands on deck. So I was detailed in the secretary's office working for one of the appointees at the time. And so we're thinking about how do we develop these public-private partnerships that can help the population we serve in order to give people critical services that they need during this time that literally feels like the world is ending. Because that is what, if you ask me what COVID was, it felt like the world was ending during that time. It just was like a lot, every day was like a something that was scary. And so in that role, I was being asked legal questions, but I was also being asked, someone donated X, what should we do? Right. You're kind of like, okay, or we want someone to donate X. Can you get on the phone and make the case for why they should donate X? And that was the first way I was like, oh, this is kind of businessy, right? You have to think about, yeah, there are legal issues here, but I also have to think about what does this mean for the business, even if that business is the federal government. And yeah, our business goals might be different from the private sector. And that business's particular goal, business being the federal government, was to serve a specific population. You're still trying to figure out, like, how do I make choices that consider the legal framework, but ultimately are going to push the goals of this particular agency forward. And so that is kind of the first place where I started to think about and honestly, in practice, develop the skills of, okay, you're a business. Now you have the X, and like, how do you figure out what to do with it? Right. And how do you navigate the nuances of red tape and all of the things? And so I think that was a very good foundation for then the transition over to private practice, where you need to be able to think of like a business person in order to help your clients.
I'm glad you got into conversation of learning your business because that's like a number one advice lawyers are given. Go
Yeah.
learn the business, whatever that means. And I'm just curious from your perspective, what does it mean? What does it actually mean in practice? And how do you actually develop that skill?
Yeah, I'm going to actually start with how you develop the skill, because then I think it becomes more clear what it means. You develop the skill by being curious. You should not be, as an attorney, only attending meetings with other attorneys, right? Every meeting with the engineer, especially when you start a new job, right? Every meeting with the engineer, with the product manager, with the marketing, when people are talking about words like, you like, I've never heard this word before, I have no idea what it means, like, that's the meeting that you need to be in, because that is where you start to understand, like, this is what they're building. That is where they talk openly and freely about what they want to build or the concerns they have. And that is where you start to learn about, oh, this is what the thing does, right? And so that becomes important, because then when your client comes to, because often clients don't come to you with, this is the full story of what I want to build, and these are the 3, 4 questions I want to have. They come to you and say, oh, who wants to do X? That's fine, right? And so, unless you understand the context of the business, you're not going to know exactly how to ask the follow up questions, or why the question they ask you might be important, or why the question they asked might not even be the question that they really need the answer to. And so, knowing the business is like, that is to me the one outside of relationships, the single most important skill, because then, even again, it starts to build trust. If when an engineer comes to you and asks a technical question, you can speak their language because you have spent the time to sit in on the engineering calls for 6 months, and now you know, okay, I know what they were building was X. And so now that he's asking me a question, he doesn't have to go through and explain steps A, B, and C. He can just explain D, and he feels really confident. And so the next time he has an issue, he's not going to say, oh, I don't want to talk to the lawyers, the legal team. He's going to be like, oh, I know her, and she was like great last time, I didn't have to explain ABC. She's the person I should go ask, right? And so it ends up fostering this constant relationship where you are like working together, as opposed to, oh, I just need legal to kind of check the box and stamp and keep going.
Yeah, don't you keep a big rubber stamp on your desk.
Listen, everyone wants a rubber stamp. I'm like, I want a rubber stamp from legal. These things sound special. Give me one.
Give me some rubber stamp, please. I love that. I love that. You got into this issue of, which is the term that is often used as trusted strategic advisor.
Yeah.
What separates lawyers, and I'm going to use that overused term,
Yeah.
who become trusted strategic advisors from lawyers who remain like technical experts?
Yeah. Authenticity. I think that, and it's like such a simple word and such a simple answer. And it, on its face, it probably had, people don't feel like it has anything to do with how do I become trusted versus how do I not be. I think authenticity, all those things around building stakeholder relationships, around understanding the business. If you are someone who is difficult to manage or deal with, if you are someone who is constantly chasing like fame or the next thing, or if you are someone who people feel like they can't trust, it's going to become difficult for people to invite you into those spaces and to come to you when they have concerns. And so I have found that authentically showing up as myself is real. Like it seems so simple because you're like, I guess we can all be authentic, but showing up as myself has been the easiest and the best way to start to foster those relationships, and in turn that turned me into a trusted legal advisor, right? And to be honest, some people you'll have to do more than just be authentic with, right? You'll need more touch bases. You'll need to reach out to them more often. You'll need to be on more calls with the engineers at some point, and that's okay, right? Because everyone's different. And so some people need different levels of engagement to start to feel like, oh, this is a person I can go to. But honestly, I think it starts with authenticity, like showing up as your true self, saying what you mean, doing what you say you're going to do.
We are coming to the end. Maybe I'll ask you one more question before we
Okay.
go to goodbye.
Okay.
Goodbye is coming, Kemi. Just so you
Okay.
know, I'm gonna be so obvious about telegraphing it. It's coming. It's totally coming.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it's coming. But I'm really enjoying this conversation. If you talked about a few things, pivoting as a sort of as a lifestyle, as a vibe
Yeah.
to improve your circumstances. I thought it was a great conversation. And lawyers, if they're the AI, we talked a little bit about AI and the importance of still being human and building authentic relationships so that you can be that trusted advisor. And if a lawyer listening today feels stuck in the role that no longer fits, or there are quite a lot of actual layoffs, folks are in transitions, quite a lot of folks in transitions in law. Many of them are, in fact, in house. We have seen cuts in some of the biggest, best companies in the world in the name of AI. What is the first practical step you would recommend that they take?
Yeah. The first practical step is understanding where you are, right? Obviously, a forced transition or pivot, like a layoff, is probably different from a feeling, right? And so I think taking a real assessment of like, where am I on my journey to pivot? Is this a forced one, like some of the ones that I described, or is this one where I'm like, I have a feeling that something's off? Because I think depending on where you are, that will help you figure out your next step. So for example, if it's a forced pivot, there might be driving forces that require you to say, I need something quickly and similar. And right, that's a different pivot conversation than if you're like, this feels off and these are the reasons why. Because if you have a these are the reasons why, that obviously can help you drive what your next pivot is, right? Like I mentioned in my example, I was like, I want to do something different and here are my reasons why. And so that started to drive what my potential pivot looked like. And so I think understanding where you are in the landscape and your why, or what is your driving force for a particular pivot, is the thing that you should start with.
And it's time to say goodbye. Unfortunately, maybe you can leave us with one takeaway. You've covered a lot of things, from authenticity to pivots to rising as a first gen lawyer to all kinds of things. What is one takeaway you would like folks to consider in light of this conversation?
Yeah, it would be brave, right? I think that there are so many things that can make you feel fear or make you feel like you should diminish yourself. But I think in a world where we're talking about how do we move forward, how do we become our best self, it's be brave, right? No matter what you do, be brave, have tenacity, keep moving forward, know that there is power in the pivot, and make sure that you always be brave.
I love that. Be brave. Kemi, so glad we had this conversation.
Me too.
Just love it. Thank you so much for bringing your full authentic self to Notes to My Legal Self. those are the conversations I love and cherish for the rest of my life. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, audience, for joining us. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Notes to My Legal Self. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They are an act of courage. Remember, the future of law is bright. Enjoy your in-house practice. It's an adventure of a lifetime. See you soon.